Hello, History Leaks here. The first few episodes of the new show Shogun have been released, and so far it has been a very captivating and compelling story set in feudal Japan during the Sengoku Jidai warring period. And this was also a period when many European merchants and traders began to arrive in Japan for the first time. And in this show, you're introduced to a character who is shipwrecked and captured by the Japanese. His name is John Blackthorne, and he's from England. And I found his predicament so interesting that it made me want to look a bit deeper into his story. And what I found shocked me. Their original mission wasn't to go to Japan at all. It was actually to reach the western coast of South America. And Japan was only their plan B if that failed. So they set off from Holland with 5 ships and sailed across the Atlantic Ocean through the Straits of Magellan. Only 3 of the 5 ships actually made it through the Straits of Magellan. The others were lost due to storms. Another was actually captured by the Spaniards. And once they went around the tip of South America and actually reached the Pacific Ocean, they didn't actually want to stay in the western coast of South America because they were afraid of further attacks from the Spaniards. So they decided to keep going west to Japan. On the way, they're said to have made landfall in some islands, which were probably the Hawaiian Islands. And some of the crew members actually abandoned the expedition and decided to stay in Hawaii. They sailed westwardly to Japan. After 19 months, they finally reached the coast of Japan. There was only one ship remaining, and it was called the Liefde, which means charity in Dutch. The other ships were lost for various reasons, storms, or they may have even just been lost their way and ended up going in a completely different place. Out of the original crew of 100 sailors, only about 20 were left, barely alive, sick, dying, starving, and diseased. And they managed to harbor their ship in a place called Kyushu in Japan. Out of those 20 men who actually made it, only 9 would survive. And one of those men was called William Adams. And William Adams is the man who John Blackthorne in the show is based on. His life is based on William Adams. William Adams was actually an Englishman, even though he was in this Dutch expedition. We know a lot about his life through the letters that he wrote to his wife throughout his journey. And in his letter, he describes many of the encounters he has with the Japanese and even his journey to get there. So in the show, obviously his name is John Blackthorne, but the show is actually based off of a novel, also called Shogun, from 1975, by an author called James Clavell. And he kind of, I guess, took these characters from history but gave them different names. So John Blackthorne is William Adams, and another one is Toranaga, the daimyo who captures him, is meant to be Tokugawa Ieyasu. So in William Adams' letters, he tells us that he was born in Kent in a town called Gillingham in 1564. He was an apprentice to a shipbuilder. He learned many skills like astronomy, navigation, everything to do with being a sailor. And from there, he joined the Royal Navy. He actually served under the famous Sir Francis Drake against the Spanish Armada. And there he gained a lot of experience as a pilot, piloting ships. And from there, he decided to join merchant expeditions and merchant vessels. And that's where he got involved with the Dutch traders. And the expedition that he was on is actually a predecessor of the Dutch East India Company, or what was to be the Dutch East India Company. They made landfall in a place called Bungo in Japan. And they were met by the locals. William Adams mentions in his letters that they weren't hostile towards them, but they stole everything from the ship. They stole all their goods, including weapons and cannons. And they imprisoned them, and they were taken to Osaka Castle. There were also already some Portuguese missionaries there who claimed that William Adams and his crew were actually pirates and demanded that they be executed. And the lord of that area was Tokugawa Ieyasu. He took all their cannons and all of their weapons. These would prove vital in a battle which occurred later, which was called the Battle of Sekigahara. Just like in the show, in history, William Adams was brought before the daimyo Tokugawa Ieyasu, and Tokugawa Ieyasu was a very interesting character because he was different than the other Japanese nobles of the time. He was very interested in the outside world and things outside of Japan, whereas most of the other Japanese nobles were very insular and very close-minded and didn't see much good in anything from the outside world. But Tokugawa Ieyasu wanted to learn from these foreigners, learn their ways. He saw their weapons and he saw that it could really bring him an edge in the coming conflicts with the other Japanese daimyos. William Adams was brought before the Lord, and he tells us that in a letter he says, quote, "Coming before the king, he viewed me well and seemed to be wonderfully favorable. He made many signs unto me, some of which I understood, and some I did not. In the end, there came one that could speak Portuguese. By him, the king demanded of me of what land I was, and what moved us to come to his land, being so far off. I showed unto him the name of our country, and that our land had long sought out the East Indies, and desired friendship with all kings in ways of merchandise, having in our land diverse commodities, with which these lands had not. Then he asked whether our country had wars. I answered him, yea, with the Spaniards and Portugals, being in peace with all other nations. Further he asked me in what I did believe. I said, in God, that made heaven and earth. He asked me diverse other questions of things of religious and many other things, as what way we came to the country, having a chart of the whole world. I showed him through the Strait of Magellan, at which he wondered and thought I was lying. Thus, from one thing to another, I abode with him till midnight." They were discussing, and eventually Tokugawa Ieyasu refused to execute the prisoners because they had actually done no harm to Japan. He didn't listen to the Portuguese missionaries in the end. Later on, Tokugawa Ieyasu found William Adams to be very knowledgeable. He had a lot of skills in navigation and shipbuilding, and so he actually commissioned him to build the first Western-style ship in Japan. It was used to survey the Japanese coast. For building this ship for Tokugawa Ieyasu, he gained a lot of trust in him. He actually invited William Adams to stay in his palace whenever he liked. Many of the other survivors of Adams' ship were also offered rewards, favors, and allowed to go on their own trading expeditions to nearby places. And later on, Tokugawa Ieyasu took such a liking to Adams that he actually presented him with 2 swords, which was a symbol of being a samurai. So he was probably the first Western samurai to ever exist. And William Adams ended up becoming a personal advisor on all things related to the Western world and Western civilization. And despite all of this, William Adams still had a wife and children back in England, but Tokugawa Ieyasu did not let him leave. And instead, William Adams ended up marrying a local Japanese woman and having 2 children with her. But he was still able to send money back to his family in England through the English trade posts that existed in the Far East. The Japanese actually even rewarded William Adams with his own fief in Hemi, Japan. So he had his own estate, which was like a farming estate located next to the harbor of Uraga, the traditional point of entrance to Edo Bay. And there he was recorded as dealing with the cargoes of foreign ships. We can also see from William Adams' accounts that he actually had a very high regard of the Japanese people. He said, quote, "The people of this land of Japan are good of nature, courteous above measure, and valiant in war. Their justice is severely executed without any partiality upon transgressors of the law. They are governed in great civility. I mean, not a land better governed in the world by civil policy. The people be very superstitious in their religion, and are of diverse opinions." Adams, he lived until the age of 55, and he spent the rest of his years, serving the emperor and being engaged in trade in the Far East. Adams refused to stay in English quarters, residing instead with local Japanese magistrate. The English who encountered William Adams noted that he wore Japanese dress and spoke Japanese fluently. Today, there's actually Japanese suits of armor, which you can see in the Tower of London, which were presented by the son of Tokugawa Ieyasu to an English trader a little bit after William Adams' life. And this shows that the relationship that they built with the Japanese, and it's a symbol of that. And you can actually see these amazing samurai suits of armor displayed today at the Tower of London, and they were given to the English in 1613. So he lived to the age of 55 and he died in 1620. So he actually lived quite a long life, 20 years longer than the average life expectancy for the time. And he was buried in a place called Hirado in Nagasaki Prefecture. In 1931, they actually discovered his skeletal remains. And in 2019, Japanese archaeologists finally announced the discovery of bones at the site believed to be those of Adams. After some investigation of the genetic background, the mitochondrial DNA analysis showed that the DNA likely belonged to haplogroup H, which is the most common DNA group found in Europe. The analysis also showed aspects such as dietary habits and burial style matched with Anjin. In April 2020, the University of Tokyo conducted conclusive forensic tests on the bones and confirmed it was William Adams' grave. Confirmation of the identity of the remains may have been possible with DNA data from living relatives of Adams. Thank you for watching. I hope this video taught you something you didn't know about William Adams, and please subscribe to my channel for more content like this in the future. Thank you. Take care.